This is your Chargers linebacker, Deion Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dale Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. If this is your first time tuning in to the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, week one of free agency is, well, depending on what happens on this show, it may be done, it may not be done, it may be in the books. Who knows? We still have the weekend to go. The Chargers may sign some more people between now and then. God help us, but it's been an interesting week for this Chargers fan base because when we did the live show on Monday after day one, the Chargers started off slow, and through the last couple of days, they have progressively made some moves with a combination of internal free agents that they knew that they needed to re-sign. They've gone out and they signed some external free agents as well as some familiar faces coming back to the team. But there is still work to be done, particularly at two glaring positions that people thought, especially for one, that they would address very, very early when free agency became open. But we're going to obviously take the pulse of the Chargers fans, take the pulse of everybody who's live in the chat, as Dan and I always do. Love getting a chance to talk to you guys. So please, if you do have questions, feel free to submit them. We're going to be on here for about an hour, so we got plenty of time to go over everything. Dan and I are going to do our best to get to each one of your questions this evening. But before we get into it all, Dan, how have you felt the last few days? Has your temperature gone up? Has it come down? What has taken place?
That's a loaded ass question, let me tell you. I think collectively Chargers fans have been in lots of feelings. Myself, if we had to give me like a 1 to 10 scale of panic, 3 or 4 out of 10. I put a poll up, and I will say Chargers fans are pretty consistent. All 4, like 1 to 10. I think I put 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and then like 10 to 1,000,000. All 4 are kind of in the same general numbers, but I think it's just that Chargers fans and us also aren't used to free agency going this way. We're used to the Telesco era for more than a decade, and this is just a different way of doing things, and being patient isn't always easy, but that's what we're forced with. And so I think people are having a process. But I'm excited. And I think, honestly, this Chargers roster has started to build out some depth. I think we're up to like 17 or 18 signings, which we'll get into here in a bit. Still lots of holes that have to get filled, which I think that's what gets most people anxious, which I understand. But to answer your question, I'm great. It's Friday. I think we'll see some news happen here the next day or two for sure. How are you?
I'm fine. It's been a busy week for me, and thankfully it's been so busy that I have not been able to pay as much attention to the progress in free agency. Obviously, I know everything that's taken place up to today, but I understand why Chargers fans were in, full-blown panic mode, and some still are right now, given with what's taken place. But free agency is always an exciting time of the year, but you're always, just 2 feet in front of your face, just scrolling through your phone, trying to figure out the latest news because it's always breaking. And especially with some big names that the Chargers fan base were hoping to bring in that didn't end up coming to fruition. But there are some moves that have been made that have, I think, been good for them in terms of internal free agents, some of which that had to be brought back. Mm-hmm. Signings like Mike Williams, that definitely solves the X receiver position for you. And again, a familiar face for Justin Herbert. And we'll talk about that in more depth when we get around to it. But Dan, that interior of that offensive line, that tight end spot, you look at the depth chart as where those things stand right now. Yeah, some things need to be corrected in those spots.
Yeah, so regardless of what folks may believe, this Chargers team has been busy signing folks, which we'll get to the external and internal free agent signings, as well as some possible options for the team moving forward, as well as some things we may have been hearing, but also some misses that Chargers may have been in on and are no longer in on. We also got the Chargers Unleashed hotline going off today as well. So lots to get into. Folks in the chat, you know how this goes. Give us your questions, your thoughts, your feelings. If you want to call on the voicemail hotline, feel free. We'll see if what we can do to get those in the show. 323-902-7586. Before we get to the headlines, Jake, let's pay the bills. You know the drill. Let's talk about our friends.
I know the drill, Dan. You think I don't know the drill, but what people need to know is that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. You think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every single week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share up to $200K. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get a game of blackjack or poker or on one with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. BetOnline. The game starts here. Like I told you earlier this week, Dan, you just got to get a stopwatch because that's
a good ad.
Every time that I do that from now on, I'm going to try to beat my original time. See how fast I can get through those ad reads.
Longtime listeners, anybody who wants to, give us a stopwatch in each episode. Put it in the YouTube comments. I'd be curious to see if Jake can ever beat his time. Let's start backwards, Jake. Highlight Mike Dubb. Big Mike Williams, who friend of the show for sure. I think we've talked to him 3 or 4 times, both in person and on digital StreamYard and all that jazz. One of the nicest dudes on this roster that we've talked to. One of the biggest safety blankets for Justin Herbert in his career. The 80-20 man himself. 2 years off of the ACL injury, off of a down year for him, which he acknowledged in his press conference today. Mike Williams comes back as an X receiver that was sorely missed by this Los Angeles Chargers team and fans. Do I think he is the X receiver that the Chargers need for this entire season? Not sure. But is he a X receiver that the Chargers desperately need? Yes, absolutely. So is Mike Dubb what he was in 2020? I'm not sure. But is Mike Dubb what this team drastically needs right now? Absolutely. And given the play style that this Chargers team has, run heavy, I don't see Mike Williams getting nearly as many targets as he had in the past, which means I think the chances of him getting injured does go down. And so Justin Herbert has another weapon, a trusted weapon, joining him. Jake, what are your thoughts on Mike Williams and what he had to say today in the press conference?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for everybody that was wanting nostalgia for either a Keenan Allen signing or a Mike Williams return, well, you got half of that wish thus far. And based on some comments that Mike Williams said today, he may not be done as far as the nostalgia thing goes. But Mike Williams, like you said, the X receiver that the Chargers needed, great familiarity with Justin Herbert. This benefits for a number of different ways. One, it gives you that downfield threat that you were hoping that DJ Chark was at least going to contribute in some form or fashion last year. That didn't end up happening whatsoever. So you now get a downfield threat with Mike Williams, familiarity with Justin Herbert, 50-50 ball guy, can go up there and get some of those really tough catches that you need down for some of those downfield strikes. And it benefits Quentin Johnston in this circumstance, because now it allows him to be in a position to where he can actually make the most out of his attempts, put him on those underneath routes, get him out in space, get him in those opportunities to get more yak. And obviously you have Ladd McConkey that's going to madden the slot. So as a whole, does it better the Chargers receiver core? Yes, but the work is not done at that position, which is why you can't discount the Chargers going after another wide receiver, whether it be in free agency, even though I forgot, as I just said that, I had just forgotten that they signed Jalen Reagor back to the roster earlier this week.
We're all done. We're good.
Yeah. So everything's fine. Everything's fine. But no, it does not negate the Chargers going out and getting another free agent wide receiver, or more likely, maybe late day 2, early day 3, another strict X receiver in the draft.
Yeah. Look, I love Mike Williams, and I think this is something that that Justin Herbert has not had. And you saw Quentin Johnston try to do this countless times over the last few years. And it was more like 2080 versus 80-20 when it was Quentin versus Mike Williams with those contested catches downfield. Countless times you saw Mike Williams come down with those almost every time, it felt like. Now, sometimes he didn't get back up. I get that. So I'm curious to see what the utilization will be like with Mike Williams and what type of routes they have him doing other than just those go routes, those fade routes. But Mike Williams at the $30 million cap hit that he was 2 years ago? No. But Mike Williams at a fifth of that? Yeah. So people are saying, oh, he might get hurt. Maybe. But this is a pretty low risk, all things considering. And yeah, so people are saying, let's see, Andre says, really, guys? Mike Williams is like a wide receiver 4 or 5. Yeah, he might be. He might be 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. But he's going to get used on this team regardless. And whether that is the 3 or 4 targets a game, they're going to be big ones. And he trusts him arguably just as much as Ladd. So I think this is a big one. Again, I don't think they're done. And I think what was heartwarming for me, Jake, was seeing how happy he was at the podium and him talking about like he didn't want to leave.
Yep.
Like he wanted to stay, but it's a business. He gets it. And he went through like the whole last year of his life with rehab and going on to the teams and getting cut, like all of that stuff. Like that was tough on him. And he talked about it. It was awful. And so I think he's excited for this kind of new frontier to be back with Justin and company. And yeah, I put out a little teaser. He was asked about Keenan Allen and his chances. And he's like, we ain't going to talk about that. But then kind of went on to talk about it and started talking about, he'd love to have him back. And we'll get to some of the ramifications of free agency so far. But yeah, I think people that are dismissing Mike Williams as, that's a waste. Like, I think you are sorely mistaken on the impact that Mike Williams can make on this team. There's a comment here that was regarding this. Let me see if I can pull it up. Let's see. Charles Eric says Cup signed for $15 million per year. Pretty sure Keenan Allen feels like he's worth as much. I don't see him suiting up for the team for less than $8 million a year. Hope I'm wrong. Jake, $15 million for Cooper Kupp. What do you think the market's for Keenan?
Well, there are other elements than the market strictly just for Keenan. He even said himself, I'm either going to stay in Chicago or I'm going back to LA. And we know after the Rams signing Devontae Adams that there's really only one other option in LA that he's talking about right now.
The Dodgers.
Yes. And there is, just kind of like with Mike Williams today, as he said, he didn't really want to leave, but he understood it was business at the end of the day. But as Dan mentioned, he looks really happy to be back. And he talked about how much he and Keenan Allen stay in contact with one another. And when people were asking him, like, hey, are you guys recruiting Keenan to come back to the team? He's like, can't really talk on that. But hopefully. Can't really talk on that, but hopefully. Now, I've even said that I thought, let's just say hypothetically, you fast forward, you put yourself in a world where Keenan Allen is back with this team. I'm just interested. If you had a wide receiver room that had Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston, Mike Williams, and Ladd McConkey together,
and yeah,
before the days of Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen owned the slot. That was his. And yes, occasionally he would take some of those snaps outside, but the slot was his area.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be really interested to see if they end up doing this. How are you going to deploy that? What's really good? So Mike is going to be your only real downfield threat. You're going to have Quentin on underneaths, and you're going to have some mixture of Keenan and Keenan and Ladd McConkey in the slot.
Yeah, 3 underneath with Keenan, Ladd, and Quentin.
Sounds like a Greg Roman offense, doesn't it? Sounds maybe I've had this whole thing wrong the entire time. Maybe this is the perfect thing for Greg Roman in this offense, and not to
mention, in theory, a pass catching tight end at some point, also in the middle. So it feels like a very clogged up middle to short area of the field. But look, maybe they're gonna go, Patriots of old, and just dink and dime their way all the way through, where they had Edelman and Welker, and they had Gronk, and it was just like 3, 4, 5 yards at a clip. Run game that was effective when necessary. Maybe, kind of sounds a little painful, but we experienced pain on the other side, watching it be successful too. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I still agree with a lot of the people in the chat, and I've been saying it for weeks, even when we were leading up to free agency, in terms of possibilities of Keenan coming back. Like, You say it out loud to yourself. Would you love to have Keenan Allen on this team to have him finish his career with the Charger? 100%, unequivocally, yes, you would.
All the feels.
But Ladd McConkey is the future now. And as much as I love nostalgia for a variety of things outside of football, is it right at this point in time? I don't know. But we'll see what happens, because it does sound like there are certain conversations being discussed. If it's not with the Chargers organization and Keenan Allen, it's definitely with some other people and Keenan Allen.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I would sure. Would I like to see it? Of course. And would I rather have Cooper Kupp or Amari Cooper than him? I think so. But again, I don't know what that dollar amount is. I tweeted about this earlier today. Like, let's say that Cooper Kupp's $15 million range. If Keenan comes in at 7 or 8, like, I probably would rather have Keenan, because then you can get Keenan plus, I don't know, a Dallas Goedert or Mark Andrews or someone else for the price of Cooper Kupp. But I'm just curious. Like, I just don't know what style this team wants to be from like a weapon perspective, because how long have we all talked about this team needing to get faster and more explosive and more dynamic?
It's different. It was built to be faster 3 years ago. Things are different now. It should have been faster 3 years ago. Unfortunately, different management thought otherwise and didn't prioritize that. But it should have been faster.
But this staff has also prioritized speed. Like, I mean, Jalen Reagor, quick. Darius Davis, quick. Quentin, quick. Fast, I should say. I think there's Jalen Reagor already. Like, Ladd McConkey's a 4.3 dude. Like, they're not fast. But I don't see what Keenan brings. I mean, well, let me take that back. I went too far. Keenan is a bona fide blocker, separator, and he's always open, and a security blanket for Justin. So, like, for those 4 reasons, yes, he would be an asset to this team. But if you're not giving me someone else along with it, and him, and plus Mike Williams, like, that's a hard thing to, it's a hard pill to swallow, that's going to cook for all season. I don't know. There's folks in the chat talking about Amari Cooper. I would rather have Amari Cooper as well. He's much more of the X receiver, in my opinion. He's less overlap, can be more on the boundary. He might not be the Amari Cooper of old, but I think he still gives you a lot more of what this team needs than, or is missing, than what Keenan Allen brings that this team already has. Like, the overlap of Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen is far more than Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, Jalen Reagor, Darius Davis have with Amari Cooper. Those are very different skill sets, equally important. So we'll get to our kind of free agent wish list. But Jake, a lot of people are talking about wanting Keenan, not wanting Keenan. So let's get some of these comments here. Bobby says Slay is not coming back. Madman says, I don't want Keenan to take away from the development of Ladd. Plus, Roman isn't dependable when scheming for all of this. I don't think Keenan's going to take away development of Ladd. I totally dismiss that.
So I agree with that. And I say that strictly when if you go back and you remember when training camp and preseason had Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer on this roster. Joshua Palmer was glued to Keenan Allen like Velcro, and Keenan loved mentoring Joshua Palmer, and Palmer loved learning from him. When those two were the bulk of this wide receiver group, they were the two best route runners that you had in terms of what their skill set was and what you could do. So I don't think that Keenan would stunt the development of Ladd whatsoever.
Yeah, me either.
But also at the same time, I was gonna comment on that. Just like let's fast forward to a world where hypothetically, if we wake up Monday and Keenan Allen has returned with the team, I'd have to believe that there's been some talks with the coaching staff in terms of how they can scheme fit this properly. Because again, even I'm skeptical about it. And how are you going to manage who gets the ball? Because there is only one ball. And who's going to manage each position? Because Ladd, we know what Ladd can do. We know what Mike Williams can do. We know what Keenan Allen can do. in my opinion, for Quentin Johnston to be the most productive, there's a finite amount of things that he can do that make him the most successful. So everybody's got to be on board with the scheme fit if they choose to go down that road. But ultimately, if they end up pulling a trigger, I would assume that they have a plan for that.
I would assume. A lot of you are talking about, Lad's development, and I don't think that's gonna. I really don't think it's gonna impact that. Brian says you take Allen and Ladd, same receiver. The way I'm looking at it as you can't double both on third down.
I mean, that's one way of looking at it. That's one way of looking at it.
I mean, it's true.
It was third and Keenan a couple of years ago. Now it's third and Ladd.
If that's the style they want, and they want to just kind of like death by 1,000 cuts to the opposing team, like, all right, okay, if that's what we're gonna do, I don't think people are gonna like it. You're gonna hear people bitching about yards per attempt and air dot and all this jazz all season. So like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Either Justin Herbert's gonna be a check down merchant, everything's gonna be yak, everybody's gonna dismiss that, or he's gonna be chucking it deep, and we can't like it. I don't know. It just like maybe this is modern offense, in my opinion.
Keenan wouldn't come in here to be the number one.
Of course,
that would, it still resides with Ladd. Whether Mike Williams is on this team or Keenan Allen is on this team, Ladd McConkey is still the number one receiver on this unit. But you still need downfield threats, Dan. You still need a little bit more of that juice. And when we're now, if we're talking about guys where the Chargers wide receivers had big problems last year, how about separation and man coverage? Now, if you want to just take that stat by itself, Keenan Allen can definitely do that. He definitely is over the bar when it comes to someone who could separate. That's for sure. But I'm with you, because even if you are bringing back Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, they're most likely on one-year deals. So are you going to have to remake this offense once again in 2026 to just reload it? And that's one of the reasons why I was saying the Chargers shouldn't be done with this. And they definitely should be looking to reinvest it in the draft as well.
Yeah. Zach says Keenan brings what? Depth? I don't care. Bring him back. Again, like this nostalgia alone, for sure. Fitness says I'd rather have guys that can run. At least Quentin runs a lot. He's a Dontrell Inman of the now Mr. Constant. Let's see. The point of this offense, says Jay Walt, is efficiency. What hurt the passing game last season was inconsistent receivers. I mean, both things could be true. I mean, people drop the balls for sure. But Justin also had arguably the most efficient season of his career.
Herbert. So his problem wasn't getting the ball to someone else. The problem was those people catching it or separating.
Yeah. So I feel like this fan base is kind of split on the Keenan stuff. A couple super chats coming in. Thomas Hawley with a $20 donation. Thomas, thank you, buddy. 2 lightning bolts as well. Appreciate that. Dark Star with a $10 or 10 euros, I believe, with the question. Thank you, Dark Star. With all these talks of grabbing a wide receiver in the draft and double dipping at free agency, what do we do with Brendan Rice? I want to see him get another shot and compete for Quentin's spot. The long forgotten Brendan Rice.
Well, when you've got Joshua Palmer and Simi Fehoko no longer on this team, ironically, Simi Fehoko was the one that still beat Brendan Rice out on the depth chart, even initially before week 1 took place, that there were 6 wide receivers that they kept, Brendan Rice obviously being the 6th. But it was a while until he was actually active for games. And that was for a multitude of different reasons, namely what Simi Fehoko could have done or was able to do for special teams. And in terms of his blocking ability, those were the things that separated Simi Fehoko from Brendan Rice last year. Now, when Simi got injured, and there were those occasional times where Brendan Rice got elevated, he just, there weren't a lot of opportunities for him. And quite frankly, even in preseason, that's where the real, questions were arising for Brendan Rice. It wasn't because of Brendan Rice, because he was playing with quarterbacks in the preseason that just were not able to throw the ball. And even if they did, it wasn't a good thrown ball. So he really just didn't get a fair opportunity during preseason. But even when he made the active roster, unfortunately, he just couldn't make the most of his opportunity. So, yes, I would love to see Brendan Rice get another crack at it in year 2. I'm sure that he's going to get every opportunity to do so. And it'll be interesting with this roster. And I'm sure that there's going to be some things that he has learned moving forward. But yeah, he's still got work to do. There is no guarantee for him, but I would love to see him get another shot.
I'm with you. There was a question here if I would rather see Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Ladd McConkey, or Mike Williams, Ladd McConkey, and Matthew Golden, which I don't think there's any question which I would rather see. So I think we also all know the obvious of it being the latter. And Brad says, build through the draft. I agree. And this is one of the things, Jake, that this is not like a soapbox moment. This is not me trying to poo-poo on the fan base or trying to this isn't that. It's more just the crashing out of a lot of the fan base. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And the surprise of this Chargers fan base and the anger and the venom towards Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz and calling for them to be fired. And the thing that I constantly go back to is how can you be surprised? You either weren't paying attention or you just refuse to listen. It's one of the two. Because this front office has told you how they operate, and you've seen how they operate for the past decade plus in another uniform with Baltimore. He's talked about it at the combine. He's talked about it at the podium for the this is what they do. They supplement in free agency. They build in the draft. They look for surplus value in free agency. They don't overspend. They're responsible, and they're methodical. What is give me one signing or non-signing other than, again, they're not perfect. We would have done the Poona Ford signing in a heartbeat. That one I thought they should have done. But for the most part, this Chargers team is pretty on brand. Now, are there other things that need to happen? Sure. But there's a lot of people that can still make it happen out there in free agency.
I think it's more so, Dan, because, Poona Ford was, I think, a gut punch to everybody. You would love to have Poona Ford back, given how much he contributed for your team. And yes, when that happened, it immediately elevated the need to bring back Tahir Tart. And not only that, you then try to supplant the loss of Poona Ford by bringing on Deshaun Hand, and I'm blanking on the name, Naquan Jones, I believe.
Yep.
So now you're trying to supplant one player with two players to try and reinforce that defensive line, which they're good at stopping the run, but they're not the interior pass rushers and pushbacks that Poona Ford was able to create for that. So that, I think, was one of the first things that obviously had people, really riled up. And then I think more of the obvious one, we talked about this, Dan, plenty of times way before free agency even started, is that you could not go into this next season with the same trio of interior offensive linemen that you had. And whether this is going to be a free agency move or a draft investment that you're going to do, you would have felt, just especially after watching that Houston Texans game, that's where they would have started. But there were internal free agents that obviously took precedence. Bringing Khalil Mack back after Joey Bosa was let go, that was a huge need that they needed to do. If they didn't do that, you probably could have put the edge position right up as a need for 22 if Khalil Mack didn't end up returning. You're still going to need another edge, and I still believe that you're going to prioritize that before the end of day 2 because you need to start looking for the future. But I think it was at those two positions, Dan, where it's, especially after you heard some of the comments from Joe Hortiz and Jim Harbaugh after the season was over, when they themselves have been saying, well, we didn't put Justin in the position to succeed. And we all know Jim Harbaugh looks at offensive linemen, tip of the spear, also as weapons. So the fact that we are almost 1 week out of free agency and an offensive move other than Bradley Bozeman coming back and re-signing, I'm sure that had a lot to do with the spark that lit the fire under this Chargers fan base.
Totally. And it feels like the fan base is just assuming that the holes that this Chargers team has in the roster now are never going to get fixed. And it's just going to remain as is. And this Chargers team to go into week 1 with the same offensive line, with the same running back, with the same receivers. But like, that's just kind of ridiculous, to be honest. I just don't see it. Like that, there's no way they're going to do that. And to think that this Chargers team is just done right now, like, come on. You know that Joe Hortiz and Jim Harbaugh watch what happened in that playoff game and throughout the season. There's no way, like, this is me being frank and blunt. There's no way they're that stupid. There's no way that collective brain trust at the Bolt is going to be like, yeah, that was fun. Let's run it back. Like, come on. Have they done anything yet? Publicly? Officially? No. That doesn't mean they're not doing anything. I'll bet anyone right now, a 30 rack, whatever you want, that they will do something for the offensive line before the draft. Anyone want to take it? Anyone want to take it? Anyone? In the chat, let me know. I'll wager that any day of the week. A lot of people are in the chat.
I think if you lose, Dan, you're going to need to not only obviously supply the 30 rack, but what I also think is that you should have your own 6-pack that you need to down within 40 minutes of the show.
And I'll be right there with everyone, livid. Trust me, I will. They're just not. There's no way. There's no way. And people say, oh, they could have been responsible and still paid a legit receiver. That kind of runs counter. Could they have gotten a receiver? Sure. But would that be responsible? Well, could they have gotten DK? Sure. What the hell? $30 million for 5 years?
As we said on Monday, do I believe that the Chargers were in those talks with DK? 100%. I believe that was way too much smoke for there not to be fire. But DK getting a 5-year deal at that clip was much more than what people were originally thinking that he was going to. And remember, this wasn't Seattle just trading him. They gave DK, him and his representation, the permission to go out and seek a trade. So yes, Seattle's going to want some fair compensation back, but DK is also going to want to get his money. And whoever negotiated that deal got himself a payday, because that's hella big for DK. So he went out, he got the bag, he got his, and Seattle made sure that they got theirs as well. Yeah, what I was going to say, Dan, in terms of some of the moves that they have made, because majority of them, outside of outside of Dante Jackson, majority of them have been all 1-year deals. Mm-hmm. Here's what I think that Joe Hortiz is once again banking on. And I will say this actually in a positive light, because this is something that the Chargers have not had the crutch to bank on in years past. Like if you go back and you look at some of the bigger name free agents, whatever position it was, and they didn't end up hitting on a return on investment, i.e., the last time that the Chargers had this much cap space, bringing in guys like Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, J.C. Jackson, whoever it was, you could say 95% of those free agent signings didn't end up panning out and didn't end up contributing in a big way to where they ultimately ended up seeing another contract. What the Chargers have now, and I specifically highlight this on defense, when you have Jesse Minter, and more importantly, when you have Steve Clinkscale, who was able to resurrect Christian Fulton's career, was able to do wonders in a rookie season with Cam Hart and Tarheeb Still, with what you were able to do with Elijah Molden when he came over via a trade late last year. That's what you're banking on. Now, yes, Dante Jackson and Benjamin St-Juste have their flaws. There is no question about that. In terms of how they fit Jesse Minter's scheme, it's beneficial for them. I think that they are putting 100% confidence behind this coaching staff to do exactly what they did with Christian Fulton. And they have an idea and they have a scheme for how they want to utilize them. Now, on the surface level, I totally understand people to have their doubts. But the Chargers, when they have done previous free agent moves like this, it's more so that they've not like this. Yes, I apologize. When they've done previous free agent moves and it's the bigger names and it's the bigger contracts, it's the coaching or it was the scheme fit that made their play poor and not a return on investment. They now have the other side of the coin where they did it great with 1-year deals last year. J.K. Dobbins, Poona Ford, Christian Fulton, they all got paid. And all of a sudden, Jesse Minter was able to resurrect a number of guys' career. When was the last time that you could say any Chargers member of the coaching staff did something like that in 1 year? So that is where I really think that this front office organization is betting on, is saying, look at what we've done. We have a plan for these guys. We know the type of guys that we want to bring in that are going to fit this system, and this is how we're going to do it. And yes, to Joe Hortiz's plan in terms of gaining comp picks and all of that type of stuff, this is exactly where it's going to go. But once again, you're talking about banking on 1-year deals. Is there a risk? Yes, still there is a risk, just like it was with Christian Fulton last year. But Dan and I can tell you right now, I guarantee you they ain't done adding corners. And they will probably select another one between now and the end of draft weekend for sure to bolster that roster.
They've got 10 picks currently as it stands. Jake, let's get to our voicemails. I think we have one today that I found, 323-902-7586. I'm sure this one's going to be nice and even keel, even temperament for Friday.
Well, I'm calling in because I'm hitting the panic button.
No.
Here we go.
There we go. All right.
Had enough
Let's
of this.
hear it.
I'll first start off with us not signing Poona Ford. That was an outstanding price. I don't think I've ever been excited for a Chargers D tackle in I don't know how many fucking years.
Uh-oh.
Was that the end of the voicemail?
That was it. I think he just crashed
That
out.
was it?
That was it.
Oh, that sucks. Like he was so pissed off about the loss of Poona Ford that he's just like, I've never been so fucking pissed off or so excited for a D tackle in the Chargers in years. And then call ends. Damn. Well, look, I'm fully in agreement with everything that he was, unfortunately able to say on that voicemail. I wish he could have said more. But as far as Poona Ford goes, yeah, I am in no disagreement that he is one that I felt that the Chargers needed to bring back. He should have been on the short list of the priority internal free agents for the Chargers to bring back.
And I think he was.
And good for him. Good for him getting a contract like that. But then you see some of the other deals that have been shelled out. And yes, if there's one roster move to say why, it's that one for sure, that you could go back on and say, whatever ended up happening. And yet we're not, we don't know what's being said or not, but there should have been every attempt to bring back Poona Ford.
Robert D says going into the with 15 holds and only 10 picks doesn't out either. Jake. Okay, realistically, let's level set here for a second. Folks in the chat, what is the biggest hole this Chargers team needs to fill right now? Offensive line.
IOLs better be flying in the chat right now.
Yes.
Yes.
But how many actual holes do we have on this roster right now? Like, as much as everyone wants to kind of go crazy and freak out, let's think about it for a second. Quarterback, both done. Taylor Heineke brought back in. Justin Herbert, obviously. Running back, you can argue there's a spot there or two. And J.K. Dobbins is still out there. You got the best running back class in who knows how long in the draft to help facilitate that. And you brought in Najee Harris, who's a bell cow. Receiver, let's just say one or two. Okay, pick a number. So we're now at 3 or 4. Into your offensive line, to your point, 100%. You could probably bring 3 guys in. Okay, I'm being fair. Again, I'm being honest here. So that's 7 roster spots. I think into your defensive line, maybe 1 or 2 if you want to draft it. But I think so far free agency, they're probably good. Edge, maybe 1 or 2, but I think they can go into the season with the exact same crew right now and be happy with it. Depth perspective, I think they can do a succession plan.
Yeah, you better.
Okay, so 1, fine. But like, these aren't crazy holes. Like, you're talking about succession plans right now. We're not talking about like starting positions. There aren't as many holes as people think. And then everyone's, they have 10 picks. You're only going to get like 2 or 3 successful draft selections out of that. Guarantee you it's the over if we're looking at Hortiz in the past.
You got 4. Last year.
4 last year. That was less than 10 picks.
It's pretty damn good.
So, like, let's pump the brakes a little bit here. People were saying the Stone Smart leaving stung, and I tend to agree. And I think there are layers to this, in my opinion. We all saw that Evan Ingram looked at the Broncos, went to the Chargers, then went back to the Broncos, and rumor has it was roughly the same contract. I would have loved it. That was the one guy I wanted from a free agent perspective on tight end. That was a free agent. Again, there's still Mark Andrews, Gal Stoddard, who's there. We could still get into who are trade candidates. Mark Andrews might get released. Who knows? But the Stone Smart one kind of surprised me because that seemed like a roster move that this franchise and Joe Hortiz would go after. Like the low budget, high value opportunity that probably would have, I don't know how much he got paid, but it would have been what, 2-3 million at max.
But correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't they remove the
tender?
The RFA tender? So I'm wondering, was there something behind the scenes that ended up taking place for them to even do that in at all? Because as it stands right now, he was like your only move tight end that you had left on this roster because you have Will Dissly, you brought back Tucker Fisk. You need someone who's obviously going to be a move tight end and be able to be a downfield threat for Justin Herbert.
Mm-hmm. But that one didn't make sense to me because that was an easy roster hole that they could have filled for cheap. And it could have, in theory, gotten surplus value out of. So when I saw that happen, and again, this might just me being pie in the sky guy, but like, I feel like something's happening at tight end. Either via trade or they're prioritizing it in the draft. Like it has to be one of the two. There's no way, they're not.
Here's two sides of coin, how I felt about the Evan Ingram going to Denver situation. Right with you. Would have loved to have seen Evan Ingram with the Chargers. Would have been a great option for Justin Herbert that he has not had at tight end since the days of Hunter Henry. Now, let's just say worst case scenario, you're not able to get a trade for Dallas Goedert, Mark Andrews. It at least takes one team that has been long rumored to draft Colston Loveland off the board with selecting Evan Ingram and signing him in free agency. That's to be the Denver Broncos. You have the Saints who brought back Juwan Jennings, who was another option that we were talking about in terms of free agency. Mike Gesicki obviously ended up signing elsewhere as well. So the tight end market shrank really fast in terms of what was open and available at that point in time. Yep. So I look at it as yes, Evan Ingram signed with the Broncos. That sucks. But that's one less team that could have taken Colston Loveland before you.
Yeah.
And with the tight end room the way it is right now, if you're to come up with a short list to say who are the possibilities at 22, if Colston Loveland's still there, I don't see at this point, if you were to tell me that we're going from today, March 14th to April 24th, with the tight end roster the way it still looks right now, you should be sprinting that card up there if Colston Loveland ends up making you to 22.
And I think they would. And that's even if they did get a Mark Andrews, honestly, or Dallas Goedert. I think they still could go that route. I like it. Well, let's talk about that for a second. A lot of people want to talk about kind of who's next, what options the Chargers team has moving forward. You know, I think there's a lot of folks that are on the wish list, so to speak. I have some here on the screen. Folks in the chat, let us know who you want if they're not on this screen or if they are. But there's a lot of names out there that can fill in the holes that this Chargers team has and can set them up very nicely going into the draft. And these are just a few of them, but Mekhi Becton's probably my top interior offensive line guy. Imagine that mountain next to Joe Alt and the size of that side of the line with Najee Harris behind it. Like that would be incredible. Or hell, put him next to Rashawn Slater and that side would be incredible. Who cares? They got to figure out something at center. And I hope they don't just put all of their money on Zion Johnson having a rectified career at center. I don't see that happening. And I don't see them then realizing, oh, yeah, well, then we'll just keep it at Bradley Bozeman. Like that just doesn't seem like what this team is. The tight ends, though, Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, you saw Philadelphia already sign, I believe, 1 or 2 tight ends in free agency. Seems like that guy's leaving. And then Mark Andrews, a lot of people are expecting that he's going to be, I think he has a roster bonus coming up soon, in which if they don't release him by, I think, Monday, they're going to owe him a whole bunch of coin. So he very likely could be released. Amari Cooper, I talked about already, likely. Tevin Jenkins into your offensive line. Jake, you probably got a bunch on your end too. There's a lot of guys out there. If you bring in, like, for example, if the Chargers go out and get Amari Cooper, Mekhi Becton, and Mark Andrews, bro.
I would say that you landed on your feet.
You landed on your toes in the clouds.
I would say somehow you landed on your feet, and you'll use the draft to obviously round everything out. But I would say, hey, you may have started slow, but hey, you finished pretty strong as it relates to this free agency period, if that indeed ends up happening. Now, you were asking me, I'm sure, Jake, you have a lot of options. No, I don't, because a lot of them have already gone. So everything's been compounded. And to be perfectly honest, it's relatively similar to the list that you have up here on the screen. I don't see how you cannot make a push right now, the way that the guard market has shrank dramatically over the last few days. I don't see how you cannot put all your chips on the table right now to go out and get either Mekhi Becton or Tevin Jenkins. And personally, I feel like that Becton would be the better option of the two. Not only just from the standpoint, if you go back and you look at the way that Baltimore has built up their offensive line over the number of years, they like a little bit more athletic profile, which obviously Mekhi Becton had coming out of college. But it was a huge benefit for him, obviously, coming from the Eagles offensive line. You're still going to come in and put him at the same spot at right guard, and you put him next to Joe Alt. That's going to benefit him. That's definitely going to benefit him. So I would love to see Mekhi Becton as a potential addition to this offensive line group. And then next would just from a matter of elimination, and you look at the depth chart of the roster, it's tight end, Dan. So whether it's Dallas Goedert, whether it's Mark Andrews, we heard the report earlier today that the Eagles have been open to trade talks involving Dallas Goedert. So who knows what's happening on that side of the spectrum. But offensive line, tight end, I think that's where you have to put a lot of your focus. I know I've mentioned Andre James, who you have up also on the screen as a center option to come in for the Chargers as well. Yeah, you definitely need to do something from a free agency standpoint to bolster this offensive line. Now, as it stands right now, we don't know what the plan is for Zion Johnson. If all the talks about Joe Hortiz talking about Zion trying out at center, that's a huge question mark at this point. We have no idea how that ultimately could go. But I definitely think that is Joe Hortiz giving Zion Johnson another opportunity. Versatility is a good breeder for opportunity in the NFL. So whether or not they end up going with that plan or not, or if Zion ends up sticking at left guard, time will tell on that. But one way or another, that means you need at least two offensive linemen, one in free agency and one in the draft, to make this unit better.
100%. 100%. Guilty as charged. Chargers Unleashed had a little bit of a breakdown, little co-op, so to speak. Jake, tell us about the episode you had with Alex.
I know, multiverse all of a sudden, if you just watched me and Alex. Now, we did that episode much earlier this morning. It was before the Morgan Fox signing. It was just a good recap of what's taken place and, take the temperature of everybody and still the moves that need to be done. And a lot of it is similar to what Dan and I are talking about right now. But, there are certain priorities at certain positions, and you just have to believe that if everybody wants to highlight the money that hasn't been spent yet, I get that. But we also know, and from what Joe Hortiz said, and what a lot of reports were saying leading up to free agency, was that they were not going to be, those big spenders in the first wave of the draft. And you go back 1 year ago, and not only because they couldn't, because they didn't have the money, but they weren't big into free agency moves that first wave of last year either. And still look who they ended up getting. Hell, they even got Elijah Molden after the draft in a trade. And look what you got out of that. So I still do have faith in this organization that they have a plan and a backup plan to the backup plan if things end up falling apart. And I can believe that there is no way between now and April 24th that they are not going to strengthen this offensive line. They have to.
They do. They do. Jake, what are your thoughts on Kyle Pitts, by the way? I feel like 2 years ago it would have been way more open to it.
Yeah, 2 years ago, maybe I would have. I don't know, but I don't even believe that Atlanta's even discussed a trade option for him. So it goes back to the early days of DK Metcalf. It's is the team even open to trading him? Number one, you don't know that. And until that ends up happening, you can't look at that as a viable option. But once again, I just don't. I would prefer Mark Andrews and Dallas Goedert above a hypothetical Kyle Pitts option.
Yeah. There's some names about Brandon Scherf out there, veteran interior offensive lineman. Will Hernandez also out there as well. Sure. I mean, the bar is pretty low with this offensive line last year in the interior. So again, like there's a lot of dudes that can help improve this in free agency and in the draft. Jake, what do you make of the Chargers not cutting Trey Pipkins, parentheses, yet?
That's the key word there, Dan. Yet. We'll see what happens in the next coming days.
Do you think
if a certain individual at a certain position that rhymes with the letter B, this is G in this case.
Wait, what?
Figure it out.
Say it again.
I'm talking about guard, you moron. Jeez, follow the bouncing ball. B, G. Holy shit, Dan. Go with me, okay? If that ends up happening, then I'm sure that there's going to be either a contract restructure or something that ends up taking place, because I think you've seen enough of Jamari Sawyer to say, yes, he could be a capable backup if we need him to come in and play multiple positions, that he can do that, especially after losing Jordan McFadden. You can do that. You have that type of depth option, but you're still going to reload at this position. What I want out of this, Dan, is whoever the Chargers bring in from a free agency standpoint, and maybe this is another reason why I'm kind of on the Mekhi Becton aspect of things, is I want one of these offensive linemen to come in and play not just for 1 year. You need to start building some consistency and stabilization in the interior of the offensive line. You've got it on the tackles, and you've got them for a while. We all believe that Rashawn Slater is going to get his extension whenever that ends up taking place, but you need some stabilization for a long period of time in the interior. Justin Herbert hasn't had anything like that since the days of Corey Linsley. So even if it is one of these, older offensive guards, could it better the situation? 100%. But I would prefer to have, a 2 or a 3-year deal with one of these guys coming in. And that's where a lot of my brain goes to the draft, to say you build one in free agency and you get one in the draft that's going to give you a long-term option at that respective position.
Another super chat from Darkstar 50. Follow up with all the defensive line we are picking up at free agency. Do we still go defensive tackle in round 1 if Kenneth Grant is there? Or do we go for Loveland if he's there? So Kenneth Grant, Colson Loveland, they're both there. Who are you taking?
Well, I think if again, this is speaking as the depth chart looks right now.
Of course.
As much as I love Kenneth Grant, I don't think you can look at that tight end depth chart and say that tight end is not the way to go. But you have to wait.
But let's say they bring in Mark Andrews.
Well, okay.
He's not young.
Now you're talking hypotheticals. If that's the case, then everything shifts once again to Kenneth Grant. I love Kenneth Grant. Jim Harbaugh loves Kenneth Grant. He loves both of these guys. He once called Colson Loveland the next Travis Kelce when they were together in Michigan. But he also loves Kenneth Grant, and so does Jesse Minter. If you were to tell me that you all of a sudden have a defensive line that has the likes of Tyler Tart, Deshaun Hand, Kenneth Grant, and you've got something cooking all of a sudden. I mean, your defensive line could say is in pretty damn good shape, and that's a nice dream to have. Now, this is what I will say. Given those 2 roster moves that you used to subplant Poona Ford, is defensive line still a priority? 1,000%. And there is no reason why you shouldn't be taking one in one of the deepest, and I'm talking Ed Harris in the abyss deep defensive line class in this year. There are guys that you can get that can contribute to this team in rounds 1, 2, 3, and 4 for whatever it is that you need to do. Now, if you were to look at one specific as far as the skill set that you need, when you look at what you already have on the roster, you may want someone with a little bit more interior pass rush options. Not so much that, having guys that can stop the run, always a great thing. But if you're looking for more of a type of guys like an Aeneas Peebles or guys like CJ West that can really find a way to get after the quarterback, they can do that. Derek Harmon is one that I love. You look at his pressure rate, flip the question around, Dan. Honestly, if it was me right now and you said Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon based on what the roster needs right now, I'd tell you it's Derek Harmon, because he's going to be the one that's going to give you that pass rush juice for sure.
It's really an interesting conversation. Maybe we'll have to table it for a different day. But if those two are on the board, let's say Mark Andrews or Dallas Goedert's still there. Like if you're a Justin Herbert or if you're a Jim Harbaugh for that matter, it's kind of a pickle you're in. Like, do you give your defensive line, the stable for a decade in theory, or do you finally give Justin Herbert like his Travis Kelce, like his go-to weapon alongside Ladd? There's no real wrong answer. I can tell you which ones the Chargers fans would want in a heartbeat. They would take Colson Loveland because how long this Chargers fan base has been looking for Justin to have his ace. But again, if that's the predicament we're in, we're sitting pretty. That's a good problem to have if you get to choose between those two. Breezy B with the $7 donation. $7 Canadian donation, I believe. Could dead cap money be part of the issue for not upgrading the interior offensive line? Because Pipkins and Zion are still on the books. Zion, maybe, but Pipkins, no. They can cut him and save like $9 million right now. So, no, I don't think that's part of it.
And you don't have the dead cap money that you had last year with the last remaining years of the J.C. Jackson contract. So there's nothing really as far as dead cap money. Maybe other than, I don't know. I don't think it was a huge number, Dan, but with them letting go of Joey Bosa, that wasn't a very big hit. So still what you have remaining, any moves that you make, I don't think are being hamstrung because of who you currently have on the offensive line.
I think the Joey Bosa one was like a $10 million cap hit, or dead cap, excuse me, but they saved like 25 because of that. So I don't necessarily think that I don't think that really has much to do with it. Jake, here's a fun question for you. We're getting towards the end of the show. So this is part where we get to the Q&A. We'll try to do some rapid fire stuff here before we get out of here for the evening. Jake, Chargers offered Ingram the same, not that one, excuse me, wrong one. There we go. This is your cup of tea. If Hampton, Genty, and Scatavo are out, who's the running back that we could take in the draft?
I'm just a big RJ Harvey fan. I'll just admit that right now. There's plenty of running backs to like in this stable. Now, hang on. Hang on a second.
I know. I got to hold myself. Go ahead.
You start to try to look at a dynamic. Now, if you put that hypothetical in front of me to say those guys were off the board, obviously I would take them in a heartbeat. They would be great additions to this team. I would have preferred, honestly, if the Chargers were to have brought J.K. Dobbins back, because I felt that he's the more explosive option between him and Najee. And as it stands right now, you haven't bettered the interior of that offensive line, so it really doesn't matter what the running back name is on the back. So you have to build the floor to move the ceiling is how it goes. But RJ Harvey, Dan, I love every bit of his tape that I watch from him, and I've been a fan of his long before the combine. I love watching him run. You look at Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, either Ohio State back. You talk about some guys that are just going to be ass kickers, and then you may actually know the full vision of this offense from Greg Roman to say, okay, I've really got my 1-2 punch at running back right now, and this is how we're going to go. You look at those two guys.
Rocket Sanders. Can you imagine Rocket Sanders behind that line?
Rocket Sanders.
So fun.
Jaden Blue always has that type of running back type of mentality. Yeah. He's a hard runner as well. I'm a big fan of Damian Martinez out of Miami. Bulldozer.
Devin Neal, honestly, there's so many running backs in this class, but Devin Neal seems like he just looks like an NFL running back. Like, I think I'm definitely higher on him than the consensus is. He looks like he has it all. But again, there's literally 10 running backs that this Chargers team could pick up. Man, this Chargers team is better. Like, easily.
The best running back draft class that we have seen in 20 years. Incredible.
Yeah. I will take it. Okay, let's get to some of these questions in the chat because we are way behind here. Let's see. Corey says, saying this again because people are still panicking. Don't forget about cap cuts as well. There will be some good players that teams had to let go after not being traded, plus the draft. It will all work out, fam. I like the PSA. There was a question here earlier. I can't find it because we're way behind, but who was the center that you wanted?
Gray Zabel, Dan.
Was that okay? Was that who we were talking about? Because really only one, right? Yeah, he could do anything.
Gray Zabel should be on the short list in terms of today. what this roster looks like in terms of options for the Chargers at 22. Not only can he play center, but he could play guard as well. He's pretty much played at every position along the offensive line. He's got experience like that. Here's the good thing for the Chargers as it relates to the interior of the offensive line. You have, first of all, the guard draft class coming into this year was good. But now you've got so many of these guys that are looked at with offensive tackles that don't necessarily have the best offensive tackle measurables that are going to be considered inside. Dan, I know you were on vacation when the combine was going on, but they had so many, a handful of guards from each group. They had them try out after the drills were over for center drills. There's so much versatility that they are trying to bring to this offensive line group as a whole, which if it means number of guys kicking into center or other guards that are going to be used at the center position, excuse me, I said offensive tackles kicking into guard and guards that are being utilized at the center position. It's a great problem for the Chargers to have because that just makes that group of people to pick from bigger.
It does. Our very own friend of the show, Brett Coleman, predicted in hopes that Gray Zabel is the pick at 22. And again, that would be the total Harbaugh way for sure.
Gray Zabel, Jared Wilson out of Georgia. I mean, did you see the offensive line group stand up when he ran his second 40? I mean, that's just ridiculous. Ridiculous. Now, he doesn't have the longevity of some other players playing that position, but damn, you talk about an athletic freak, Jared Wilson is. I would not be disappointed with that selection either.
Yeah, Bajal Tootin, a lot of people talking about him in the chat. Super fast.
And look, if they wanted to do...
But he's not Jahmyr Gibbs.
Well, I don't think that anybody's expecting him to beat Jahmyr Gibbs.
No, but they see speed. They're like, Jahmyr Gibbs and that archetype was way more well-rounded than Bajal Tootin is currently. Like, we're talking about a round one running back versus day 3.
If you drafted Bajal Tootin, it's clear that Greg Roman would be trying to replicate what he was trying to do with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, because you have a short yardage back and a guy who can bring you explosion. Najee Harris doesn't really have the explosion, but Bajal Tootin definitely has that type of juice. So it wouldn't be a bad option either. Again, you could throw any running back name at me right now, and I can make a case for why it would make sense for the Chargers. Just give me the entire running back class, and we'll figure out a way that it's going to be productive.
Catherine Dell says Henderson would be an ideal complement for Najee. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there's 10 guys.
Ass kickers is what that would be.
Yep. Yeah. All right, folks in the chat, give us your questions. We'll try to go rapid fire as we get through here. Jake, there was someone. Where to go? What round does Dan and Jake think they'll draft a running back?
No, hey, 22 as it currently stands right now is not off the board.
No, it's not.
Is it less likely considering that you have one running back there, and obviously you still have Kamani Vidal? But if you told me that Omari and Hampton was there, you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that. I think that
I don't think he'll be there.
I think Ashton Genty is gone to the Raiders at 6, especially after them picking up Geno Smith in free agency, and now Pete Carroll wants his own version of beast mode there in Las Vegas, and I think that Ashton Genty, that's where his ceiling is, and I think he could very likely be gone after pick 6. But Omari and Hampton at 22, yeah, you can't take that option off the board. But round one,
all right, so
round 2, round 3, I definitely think that you would dress the running back position in the first 2 days.
All right, so if all 3 of them are there, this is have fun.
I love how you always bring it around to these strange hypotheticals and always let's make it a multiple choice question.
Normal hypothetical as it stands roster currently, right? Hampton, Loveland, Grant.
See, this is
Who do you think they would take? Who would they take?
Who would they take?
Yeah, that's probably the better question.
Again, going off of what I know and the way that this roster stands today, March 14th, because I don't talk in hypotheticals, Dan. But if you were to ask me right now with the way that this roster is built, it's either Omari and Hampton or it's Colston Loveland, given you're weak at both of those positions right now and you need to build them up. But I believe that something is going to change between now and April 24th, which is probably going to change my answer to this.
Okay. Yeah, I have a hard time believing that they would pass on Loveland. Yeah, it's probably Loveland or Hampton. That's probably what I would say. Let's see. Mark Andrews should be next. You on board?
If the Ravens are willing to trade him, 100%.
Jeremy asked, what is the asking price for Andrews?
I don't know. First of all, have they actually said that they are, I haven't even heard like talks or negotiations or anything like that. But if you're trying to like set his market, maybe like the most that they could fetch back maybe would be a third, depending on, because I'll say this. I'll say this. You're definitely, if a player like Mark Andrews becomes available, you're going to be in another bidding war. It's going to be another DK Metcalf situation, not to that degree of him getting a huge ass contract. And I don't think a second round pick, but you are going to be in a bidding war with other teams for his services. If it was me, I'd say a fourth, and taking on his contract secures it. That's what I would do.
Joseph DiMartini, you think any chance the Chargers take a shot at Mekhi Becton?
Yes. Screw it. They better. Yes. Yes, I do.
Carson asks, what is your ideal next free agency move?
It's either.
I know you've been trench warfare for you.
That's all right. Yeah, it's you have to do offensive line. It's either offensive line or it's tight end. They are now the weakest parts of your roster as it currently stands right now.
Bendar, I apologize if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Highest spot you're willing to trade up for Genty? 15, 16, 17?
Well, again, I believe
be there.
Genty's either,
let's say he is there.
Genty's either going to go 6. Dallas should consider him at 12. You're probably going to have another team in between that's going to consider him as well, given their free agent roster moves. I mean, Ashton Genty is just a ridiculous talent and deserves to be talked about in the top 10. But I remember just weeks ago, we had mock drafts with Ashton Genty somehow miraculously falling to 22. I remember mock drafts for like a week or so before the draft of 2 years ago that had Bijan Robinson falling all the way to the Chargers at 22. And then look what happened. So
honestly, you could go to the top 15 and look at,
if it was, I would say,
how funny if the Giants got him. Like, let's say Aaron Rodgers goes to New York and they bring in Genty. Like,
oh man,
it'd be so good.
That would just be like the ownership of their mistake all over again, wouldn't it?
Own it.
I'd probably say, I don't have the draft value chart in front of me to know exactly what would go with it to surrender 22 to move up to either 15, 16, or 17. If for some reason he lasted to 17, I don't see why you're not on the phone. Yeah. I mean, that's ridiculous value if you were to fall that far.
I agree. Catherine says offensive line will be their next move. I hope. I would give a second to move up to Genty. I would rather move back, personally. Like, I love Genty, don't get me wrong. But if I can move back from 22 to, I don't know, late 20s, pick up a second or a third, yeah, you can get like 22, I don't know, I'm making up a number, 22, 49, 55, and 120. Yeah, 100%. Because this one, it's funny because people poo-poo this draft class, and I think it's for the wrong reasons. Because as much as this draft class might not have like the elite pass catchers, for example, or like the depth of elite tackles, for example, or the quarterbacks, which a lot of teams need. This draft class has a ton of other positions, that are elite, but then after that top tier, I'm going to call it 15 picks ish. Picks 16 through like 60 can fluctuate depending on what team you are. There's so many guys in that kind of cluster that are very, 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 very good, which I think bodes in the Chargers' favor. Because, if you're picking 6 Okay, cool. But if you're picking 22, like you're not going to get one of those guys in theory unless someone falls. Otherwise, trade back. Get as many of them as you can.
Dan, do me a favor. Put up Catherine's little comment here. Thank you so much.
Because it just out for that one.
Yeah, it first of all, Dan knows that he's speaking my language whenever he says the two words of trade down.
Yeah,
that's something that I've been wanting to see for a long time. It seems like the Chargers have not executed a trade down since, before the dark ages is how long it felt at this point in time. But this is a situation where I see that you could possibly do it. I love that there was a situation that when, DK Metcalf was still out there and DJ had dropped it to say, look, what if the Chargers were to give away, a second round pick for DK and Omarion Hampton's on the board? What if you end up, what was it, Dan? I think he said like trade or that you traded back or something to reacquire that second round pick. And all of a sudden you had a stud running back DK and whoever it was, like that would have been making magic. But trading down in this circumstance, especially with the way that the board's going to fall at certain positions. So whether this is running back or defensive line or any other position that should be considered deep for this class, it affords you opportunities to do so. So I would love to see the Chargers in a trade down situation for sure. And if it meant them, going back a handful of picks, if their target was running back all along and you acquire some extra draft capital in doing so, by all means, sure, do that. There's plenty of opportunities for the Chargers to do that in this draft, especially when you have the deep positions of defensive line and running back to afford you that.
Let's say they go receiver. Actually, two-part question. When is the sweet spot for receiver, in your opinion? What round? And if they were to do it in round one, how many would you take?
One. Like I said, they're not done at adding a wide receiver. You need more weapons for Justin Herbert. As it stands right now, with you going out and getting Mike Williams, your big board has probably shifted a little bit for who's going to be on the roster, who's going to be on the board around 22, what your priorities are. If for some reason Teterow and McMillan fell to 22, that's the guy that I would say, yes. That's great value. That gives the Chargers exactly what they need for a long-term downfield option. Teterow and McMillan with Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey, yeah, that sounds like the future offense to me. Now, if it's not Teterow McMillan, I know a lot of people have loved Matthew Golden's testing, and trust me, so did I. I did not expect Matthew Golden to be the faster of the Texas wide receivers between him and Isaiah Bond. That was a shocker. That definitely does not look like a guy on tape when you watch him in games that is running a 4.29 out there. But I don't think, given the roster spots that are probably anticipated for this team to fill by the time that we hit April 24th, that wide receiver is going to be one of the top options that's there on the board for them. So given that, outside of Teterow and McMillan, and most likely he's probably going to be gone, I say you address it before the end of day two. And because there's plenty of downfield X options.
You're not taking Higgins in round one? I'm not saying I would, but like there's a lot of buzz about that right now.
I love Jaden Higgins. Ohio State in general lit up the combine. Between Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel and Darian Porter, they just blew it up. I'm strictly just saying this because value to who you anticipate being there. Okay. If you traded out of 22, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
But if you told me, hey, this is 22, this is where you stand, I'm probably going a different direction in round one, and I'll address it with another X receiver on day two.
Catherine says, Harbaugh doesn't value wide receivers. They'll wait until later rounds. They just got Ladd McConkey with a trade up. So I don't think you could just say that. Breezy says, you could just trade back, select Quinshon Judkins and a tight end like Taylor.
You could. There's so many ways to play with this as far as what type of combination you could do it. And just like Breeze is saying in this comment, the running back class and the defensive line class afford you those opportunities to where you can make trade backs like this, or you can wait on certain positions for this. Now, I think there's a threshold that you say you don't cross X barrier without addressing that position. So
like
you
round
may be
4
able,
for an offensive lineman.
Whatever it is, you just put it out there to say by this point in the draft, they have to address XYZ. So it's not so much of waiting until the later rounds, because there's definitely certain positions that you say, yeah, by the end of day 1 or day 2, they need to come away with this position, and this position.
Yeah, like luckily for them, I think running back and interior offensive line, both they can do early day 3 and still get a stud at both positions. Like round 4, interior offensive line, running back. Yeah, like hell, Cam Scadaboo's reportedly going to be going on day 3. Like,
I can't wait to see your celebration if Cam Scadaboo is selected to the Chargers.
Yeah, it's going to go crazy.
Some college alum there for Dan Wolkenstein. He would love it.
It's going to go crazy. As much edge talent in this draft class, Jake, we have a couple of minutes left. We'll try to get through as many of these as we can. What are the odds our potential Bosa replacement slips to us? I'm assuming at 22.
Again, I feel like this would be a completely different conversation. I would be 100% on board with this comment if Khalil Mack was not on this team. However, saying that, you have to start looking for the future, whether this is Khalil Mack's eventual replacement, whether it's Joey Bosa's eventual replacement, but you have to find another long-term option as it relates to what you have in Thule. You need to start building your 2 edge position classes back up, and for the long term, because we've seen the Band-Aids, and unfortunately the time has run out for the Band-Aids, and the long-term options that you had, unfortunately, just couldn't stay healthy, and they're no longer on this team. So you need to start investing for what you have in the future. Now, if you're talking about the edge options, possibly at 22, obviously we're not talking about the Abdul Carters of the world in this conversation. I don't know how high Mike Green is ultimately going to end up being drafted. I personally love the idea of a Ashton Gelati out of Louisville, who's just a terrific speed rusher. I think he's got a lot of the tools that Draymond Morris Brash has as far as just what is his bread and butter. It's getting after the quarterback, and that's exactly how Jesse Minter likes to deploy him. I love Kyle Kennard, what I've seen out of him in South Carolina, play with a great, very talented South Carolina defense. So I'm not so sure in terms of where you prioritize the Bosa replacement, even at 22, given who's going to be on the board at that point in time, because you're definitely going to have a good bulk of it be either edge or defensive line that are going to come off the board before 22. But you can find those guys that you could bring in strictly on a first-year basis as your situational speed rushers and develop them from that.
2 more, Jake. This guy agrees with you, by the way, Kyle Kennard. Do you think there's anything with Tyreek Hill?
What, did he change his mind where he wanted to play again?
Like 5 different times? Sure.
No. Miami's not going to let him go. It sounds like today he's decided to come back and play for Miami again. No, that's a joke, because I just felt like since the end of the season, he said he didn't want to play. Now he's back to playing. No, I don't think that's an option.
Christian says round 1, tight end, defensive line. Round 2, running back, receiver. Round 3, offensive line, defensive line.
Wait, repeat this again. Oh, this is what they would do.
Yes.
Round 1, tight end, defensive line, round 2, running by right. Yeah. This is a good strategy, and I can't disagree with it. Outside of Warren and Loveland, you still have some good options at tight end, but it's no guarantee that you're going to get back around to 55 to get those ones that you want. Now, it's obvious, especially in this tight end class, that there's a short list of guys that you need. It's guys who could be moved tight ends and that are going to be able to be receiving threats. You could tell me right now that it's not Jim Harbaugh's thing for that tight end, this, that, and the other, but he's got that in Will Dissly. You've got that in Tucker Fisk. You just need someone who can catch the ball. That's what you really need right now. And there's a finite amount of those guys that really produced last year, whether we're talking about the Elijah Auroros, especially the Harold Fannin Jr.'s of the world, who just broke ridiculous records at Boston College. Gunnar Helm, who would be another good option. We obviously had mentioned, it was obviously mentioned with Mason Taylor earlier. So there's a finite amount of guys that you could say, and that list may even be shorter on the Chargers big board. Who knows?
Yeah.
So I would say if I was going by that individual's list in terms of priorities, defensive line deep, running back deep for what you need for the Chargers in terms of wide receiver options left. That's now simplified, but I definitely think that you could find that at the end of day 2 for sure. So tight end is a little bit of a shorter group and a little bit of less options for the Chargers to get a really good one.
Gennaro says, why aren't we talking about Zabel? We talked about Zabel for like an entire episode or 2. We've all, like Jake and I, for the record, over the moon.
We're all in on the Gray Zabel trend. Yes.
Totally. Let's see. Apparently, James says the Dolphins podcaster suggests a trade for Tua and Tyreek for Herbert. Full circle. Hilarious.
Somebody actually suggested that?
Apparently. Yes, Athir, we are live, but you're late because we're about to not be live because we're about to log off. Jake, anything else? We went through a ton here. We tried to go rapid fire a while. Do you want to answer this question before we get out of here?
How much money would you pay to be in the Warriors draft war room? This should be your question, Dan.
I think he means Chargers.
Okay. If it's
I was
going to say, are we talking basketball here to close out the show? I mean, all right. I mean, it's hang around Steph Curry in the war room. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, but he said meant Chargers. Yes.
How much would I pay to be in the, first of all, I love the intricacies of the draft. I would love to be a fly on the wall in any draft room.
In any of them.
To see how they go through their process. It fascinates me. Now, there are certain decisions that are ultimately made that end up being complete duds for sure, but that's part of the intrigue because I would love to know how they came to a decision like that for sure. So if you told me, I mean, it wouldn't take, if I had to pay money to do it and nobody just said, hey, just come in as a guest, like, great, good. But yeah, if it gave me an opportunity to do that, however, I won't be doing it this year because the 2025 NFL draft just so happens to fall on this soon-to-be 40-year-old's birthday. And there will be plenty of big boards and fan bases and celebrating going around draft weekend. That's for sure. And
I seriously cannot wait until they wanted to.
Done it for 16 years, and this one is going to be outrageous. I promise you that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. The way it's projected right now, Dan, we're looking at it about close to 15 different fan bases that are going to be there and represented. That is so good because the shit talking just flies across the room and it's so good.
Can't wait for Cincy to pick
that weekend. Cincy and Tennessee is going to be a delight at my draft party to watch because there's two individuals that are absolutely fed up with their respective franchises. Yes. They may leave the draft party in record time and it'll be a great thing to watch. But that weekend's going to be great, and that's what we're all looking forward to. Dan, first week of free agency, all in the books. Well, I mean, who knows? We could have some changes here in the next few hours, the next few days, but we're almost fully on the road to the 2025 NFL Draft. And with that, Dan and I can tell you that there are going to be some special guests that we have coming up here in the next few weeks. So lots of good things coming at you. Again, really appreciate the live chat with everybody joining. Love talking football with every single one of you guys. Great turnout for the show tonight, by the way. Fantastic turnout. So really appreciate everyone tuning in. Hopefully we can all talk about our feelings a little bit as it relates to this free agent aspect, get a little bit of vent out for those that are still in panic mode, get a little bit more calm reserve and, calmness among everybody else when they're just not panicking about the Chargers because time will tell. And there's still time before the NFL draft for the Chargers to ultimately do something. So we'll see what this weekend holds. And maybe we'll be back breaking some more news. But appreciate everyone for tuning in.
Yes, Jake, we're going to do 3 more questions. You give 1-word answers, okay? 1-word answer. Here we go. Number 1, James. Oh, let me get to it. Hold on. Where'd it go? No, I had it. Are you okay with Matthew Golden at 22?
Not now.
That's 2 words.
Well, I'm not going to say no because it's not like I don't like Matthew Golden, the player, but not now, given the roster moves that have been made.
Okay. Fitness. What about CB round 1?
If you told me that it was...
No.
This can't be just a 1-word answer.
It can.
No, it can't because it's also in the same breath as wide receiver exception. If it was Jedi Barron, that happened to fall there at 22, he won't.
That'd be like
that would be the
James,
exception.
Yeah, that'd be like Derwin James falling.
That would be the exception. But given that he's not going to be there and your corner options and what your board looks like right now, it's probably out of the question. You'll still address corner, but it'll be later.
We'll end it here with the Fear. $5 donation of Fear. Thank you so much. Wish you could have been here earlier in the show. But I have this to say. I trust my GM and coach. We have been giving big contracts to Bosa, Rivers, and Jackson. How many rings do we have? Thanks. Have a great day.
I like how you totally flipped that as far as what it was supposed to be.
Yep. Apparently, I'm a senator.
Well, you come up with a lot of these, questions. You're like, yes or no. Answer it.
Like senators, apparently.
Yes, or the press, however it is. Answer the question.
Jake, you're not kidding, man. This is an awesome turnout for a Friday night. Jake, what do you got going on tonight? Anything fun?
Going out to dinner with the wife tonight. So
good, man.
It'll be fun.
Good, man.
Looking forward to a good Friday night. Haven't had one of those in a while.
Chargers fans, Chargers Unleashed listeners, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, please hit that like and subscribe. To Jake's point, we will be having at least 3 special guests that we already have lined up, so be prepared for that. We got some gold coming your way. For Jake, I'm Dan. It's Chargers Unleashed. Enjoy your weekend, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon on the next Chargers Unleashed. Have a great weekend.